Welcome back guys to another Android development tutorial. Today we'll be talking about Room database. Now for those of you who doesn't know what Room is, in 2017 I/O lecture, Google released several architectural components. One of them was Room. Now Room is basically Google's solution. It's an external library, not a third-party library. It's an external library by Google, and it's their solution for the complex, let's just say, implementation that used to be required in order to use SQLite. Now by that I mean that those of you who used to got the chance to handle with SQLite, you know that it requires a lot of boilerplate code, a lot of handling with the cursor, a lot of overhead complexity for handling simple tasks, and it's basically hard to maintain and it's more difficult to extend. Now Google knew they need to create a solution for that, and Room is basically what they came up with. Now Room is basically just an abstract layer on top of SQLite that we handle in front of Room. All our interaction is through Room, and Room manages the entire SQLite complexity by itself. So basically with very few lines of code, we can achieve what is used to take us a lot more when using simply SQLite. By that, we can also reach to the full potential of SQLite. Right? So without further ado, let's get started. Now the first thing we need to do, as of today, Room isn't standardized in the Android Studio, so we need to add it. So let's just go to the, where is it? Let's just go to the Android documentation. Let's just copy those lines, right? We need to place them on the Gradle file, and let's just resync our project. Because I added and I deleted before I started, I don't need to sync it, but in your project you probably need to. Now Room requires several things. Now one of them, and the first thing we're going to create, is an entity. Entity is basically our schema for a table. Each entity is a table in our database, right? So for the sake of this project, what I want to create is a user entity. Now this project is going to be just a couple of text view. It's going to display the latest added user, right? So let's create a user class. Now the way Room works, it relies heavily on annotations to identify each class in the Room component system, right? So we can change, for example, table name if we want to something else. Let's just call it users because it's gonna contain several users, but we can keep it as user as well, but just for showing you how it will work further on, let's just call it users. The first thing we're going to create is a field of an integer type, and let's call it an ID. This ID represents our primary key, a way of indexing the database, the table, and finding values, right? So basically we'll find values by the ID, and we need to add it a parameter, the annotation of auto generate, and set it to true. Default is false. Basically what it does is each time we'll add a new user to the table, to the database, it will increment the ID by 1. So let's just add a couple of fields. First is going to be first name. The second is going to be last name. Both of them strings. Now, the reason why I did them separately because I want to show you another annotation called column info. And the column info allows us to change, for example, the way we address the row in the table. Now the default is the variable name, which is in this case first name, but for the sake of the argument, let's just give it a capital F for first name. The last name will keep such. Let's give it a constructor that takes the first name and last name. ID isn't required because, as I said, the primary key is set to auto-generate true. Let's give getters and setters to all the variables because they're private. This is mandatory. Getters and setters. Let's create our second class. Let's call it user DAO. This should be an interface. Now, doesn't have to be an interface. It can either be an interface or an abstract class. But in this case, we'll use an interface and we'll give it an annotation of data access object. DAO stands for data access object. Basically what it does, it's our way of interacting with the database, right? So we're gonna have here a bunch of methods, and they're gonna be the ones who handle interaction with the database. So we're gonna call a methods from the user DAO, and we'll get a return value based on the query we're gonna set to that specific method, right? Makes things a lot simpler, very modular. The entire thing, as you can see, is very separated. So yeah, now the first method I want to do is user, right? The return value is going to be user, and we'll call the method get last user, right? Basically what it does, it's going to get us the last added user, right? As I said previously at the beginning of the tutorial, what I want the app to do is to show the information about the last added user, right? So again, we'll add an annotation query. Now, the query is basically the SQLite command that is going to be executed by the user DAO, by the DAO, when this method gets called. All right. So let's start by doing this by select all, because we want to return the user. But for example, if we wanted to, we can select the last name, right, from users. Now, we saw in this case some couple of things. We saw autocomplete to the variables and to the entity name, right? Which is pretty cool when you think about it. You get yourself autocomplete, right, to a string, which is pretty smart. If we, for example, remove the S, we get a compile error. Unlike SQLite, where if we would messed up one of the variables names or an unexist command, we would have get a runtime error, which requires us to do a lot of testing. But no, in Room, we get a compile error, not a runtime error, which is pretty cool. That's also for variables, right? So we want to select not the last name, we want to select the entire user from users where the ID is equal to the select max ID from users. Basically what it's gonna do is it's gonna get us the last added user to the database, right, by its ID. It's gonna give us the user with the biggest ID, which in our case, because that's our primary key, it's gonna be the last added user, right? Now, I'm gonna show you something pretty cool that we're not gonna necessarily use all of them, but I'm gonna show you anyway. More complex project, you might have more than one DAO, right? You're gonna have a user DAO, a class DAO. For example, you want to create I don't know, a transportation app, right? You might have a bus DAO, a plane DAO, a cab DAO. You might have more than one DAO, but you don't want to add each and every one of them the same exact method, right? So what you're gonna do, what I like to do is create a base DAO. Again, it's an interface, and here we're gonna first of all mark it as DAO. We're gonna make it generic, and here we're gonna put all of the sort of boilerplate methods that needs to be added basically more than one DAO. It's gonna save us a bunch of code. So the first thing is gonna be doing is delete. Alright? Let's call it void delete value. The delete value will be t. Again, with update, void update value. And the last will be insert. Insert value. Now with insert, we need to add one more thing. We need to give it an onConflict parameter. Now onConflict is basically, for example, when we add user to our database, what happens if it has the same ID as an pre-existing user, right? So let's just conflict on conflict strategy replace, right? As you can see, we have different options: abort, fail, ignore, rollback. In our case, we want to replace. So for example, if we add a user with index 3 and there is already a user with index 3, it's going to replace it. But you know what? We don't need to import the entire thing. We can just import the replace one. All right? Now the last class we're going to create is our database class. The one who's going to give us the access to the database. It's going to be an abstract class with a database entity, and we need to pass several parameters. One of them is entities, which in our case is only user, and we're going to add a version. A version, basically what it is for example, when we change the schema of one of the tables in the database, all right? If we change the user entity and we added, for example, age variable, right? We need to change, because we changed the schema, we need to update the app database, right? So we need to change the version from 1 to 2, basically just incremented by 1. But in our case, let's just set it to 1 and let's set export schema to false. Export schema, if you want to know what it is, just look it up in Google. It's not very complicated to understand in the document of Room by Google. So we got ourselves the entities, which is all of the entities in the database. We got ourselves the version, which is the version of the database after all the schema changes, and export false that, as I said, look it up. Now, one thing I forgot to do is just to extend the base DAO that we created. Now, the generic value will be user. Now, if we go here, we can see that we have all of the methods. We have the insert value, we got the delete, we got the update, all of the value, all of the methods. Pretty dope. So, now let's just add an abstract method that returns the user DAO, and this is basically how we're gonna interact with the database. So let's go back to the main activity, and first of all, let's just initialize the database and the user DAO as class variables. Let's make sure the app database is equal to null. Now, obviously, the thing is on create method, there isn't a really reason for it not to be null, but just for the sake of this tutorial and for you guys to understand that initializing, creating a new access point to the database is something that's very costly, and we don't want to do it when we don't have to. All right. Also, keeping an open connection to the database is pretty expensive, so we're gonna handle this as well. So let's just initialize it by using a room static method called database builder, which will take a context, the class itself, and a string, which is the database name. Let's call it users db, and let's build it. Again, with the user DAO, database, user DAO. And for the sake of symmetry, because we initialized the database in onCreate, Let's destroy it on this thread. On this thread, let's close it. So if database app database is different than null and app database is open, app database close. Right? So now let's add a click listener for the floating action button. Now, when the floating action button will open, I want to open a dialog fragment to add new user. Now, because the tutorial isn't supposed to focus on dialog fragments, I'm gonna do it without explaining what I'm gonna do, right? So, but you can still learn from me by pausing the video and just copying. Now, the reason why I didn't edit these videos because I don't want to explain how to create a dialog fragment, but I still want to show it to you. So, hope you're liking it. If not, just tell me in the description, in the comments, in the comment section below, and I'll change. And next time I'll edit it out. Listener, which is an interface to add a new user to the activity so we can add it to the database. Initialize it in the onAttach method. And also in the deprecated one because we want to support lower API versions. I at least want to support lower API versions. So now let's show it. The tag is going to be null. Let's implement the listener, and it's one method. All right, and here basically what I want to do is I want to create a new thread. I want to add the user to the database, but because reading and writing from a database is an IO exception, which IO exception cannot be done in Android on the main thread because it might block the UI thread. Right? Android will automatically throw us an exception for doing so because it's a long running operation, right? So we can't do it in the foreground in the UI thread, so we must do it in the background, right? So let's create just a new thread. I can obviously have done it with, for example, async task or something like that, but just to keep things simple and focus on the room, I'm gonna do it like this, but it can be easily done with async task if you prefer. So let's just add it, insert value, user. Now I want to update the UI. But first, let's just uh, let's create a couple of text view to contain the data, to show the data uh, about the user. It'll be a first name. Now, because both of these text view are gonna be pretty similar, I don't want to create a separate style for each one. So what I'll do is I'll go to the styles, main text style. Now text style, text size, text color, text item, text alignment, center. Let's just give it a padding as well. Padding 16 dp. Right? Now let's just add the style for both of them. Let's just try it out, see how it looks. Daniel King. Alright, pretty cool. Let's create class variable text view, LBL first name, LBL last name. Obviously, it's very simple, but it should give you a perspective of how to work with room database and how easy it is. So now I'm just going to create another class variable of handler type. Now handler is basically a class that allows us to address the UI thread, update the UI thread from a background thread. So for example, if I would like to make a toast here, I couldn't because I'm on a different thread inside of this run method. But what I can do is I can call the handler post new runnable, pass a new runnable. It doesn't require start or anything. It automatically starts. And I can update the UI from here. Last name, set text, user, last name. That's it. So pretty much done. But if you think about the app and how it works, once I open the app, I can add users and I'll see the information about them. But if I close the app and relaunch it, I won't see the data, right? Because if you see on the onCreate method, I haven't set text for the LBL first name or for the LBL last name. So let's do it in the onResume. You can also do it in onCreate, but let's just try it here. New thread, new runnable, start. Alright, let's get the information user, get last user, handler dot post new runnable, LBL first name, set text, user, get first name, LBL last name. Let's run the app, see that everything working well. As you can see, very simple app just to demonstrate how to work with Room database. Now, obviously, I did something that you wouldn't do on a fully fledged app, and that's because you want to support scalability and modularity. But in our use case, you can see how the core concepts about Room IO operation should be happening on the background, and you can update the UI from a background. And Room requires three classes of three entities: a database, an entity, and data access object. Each and every one of them handles a different section about the app. Let's see if we have any errors, and we do. Let's see what happens. Go back, see what happened. Hmm. The error that I got is that user is null, and that's because we don't have any users in our database. Let's see if we get another error. Nope, we don't. So let's open the app. Let's press the add the floating action button, and let's add a new one. Daniel King. Add user. Perfect. Let's try rotate the device and see if data persists. It does. Let's try again. Let's relaunch the app. Alright, pretty nice. Let's add a new one. Let's call it David Cardi B. Because she's making money moves. Alright, pretty dope. Alright, I think everything is working pretty well. Let's just relaunch the app. Now, for those of you who says that pressing this button isn't enough to close the app, it doesn't true. When pressing this button, alright, when pressing this button, the onDestroy method gets called, so the app gets totally destroyed. Alright, pretty cool. Let's just add a third one to make sure that everything is working well. Alright, pretty cool. So as you can see, very simple implementation of Room database. Very easy to use, very simple to understand. You can take what I've shown you into a million different directions. You can create some amazing thing with simple core concepts. For example, creating a base DAO and what's on conflict strategy is a database. Really cool things you can create. You can create a static variable that is that here you're gonna make sure that if it's null, return it. If not, create a new instance of it and then return it. Basically, sort of a single tone pattern. In the main activity, you saw how we handle the database. It should be happening on a different thread. Handler allow us to update the UI. You should close the Room database in the onDestroy method. And yeah, pretty much that's it. You got a glimpse of dialog fragment. I didn't explain much because it isn't the main focus of this tutorial, but still you saw what it takes to create a dialog fragment, implement the onCreateView method, which is one of the lifecycle methods of the third lifecycle methods of dialog fragment. And yeah, that's it pretty much. you guys enjoy it. If tutorials are too long, or I'm explaining too much, or I'm not explaining too much, please comment in the comment section below so I can improve myself. But as you can see, I'm sharing with you some pretty advanced, I wouldn't say advanced because I'm showing you really the most simple implementation of each one of them, but I'm giving you some great knowledge that you can combine it together and create some really cool things. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye bye.